looking, throwing in the end zone. Caught it! Montana, touchdown, John Taylor.
Young to the air, Young to Jerry Rice, touchdown San Francisco.
Young stumbles on the way back and fires up the middle. Pass is caught by Owens.
Welcome to the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers discussion and analysis, plus timely and entertaining sports and pop culture topics. And today we're going to be looking at the 49ers-Rams matchup. Deebo Samuel out for a few weeks with a calf strain, the injury impact there. The Rams are essentially the walking wounded. We're going to be going over all of their injuries, discussing if Brock Purdy needs to step up in the absence of Deebo and McCaffrey. A lot of differing takes out there. Kyle Shanahan discussing the offense and how it changes without two of his most important playmakers. Ongoing defensive issues on third down for the Niners defense that I want to discuss. And then we will get into a game prediction. In the plus section, I'm going to be discussing the Tua Tagovailoa situation. And I recently watched the movie Civil War, so I have some thoughts on that I wanted to share with you. But like always, it starts with the Niners, so let's get right into it.
Let's talk Niners.
So after a pretty good game and a losing effort at Minnesota, Deebo Samuel is out for a few weeks with a calf strain. Per Kyle Shanahan, there is no Achilles tendon involvement. He is not on IR, so hopefully he'll be back in the 2 to 3 week time frame. He's had a pretty good start to the season. 13 receptions for 164 yards on 19 targets. He's been picking up the receiver slack until Brandon Ayuk gets back in the swing of things. I think we all knew and expected that with the prolonged holdout, it would probably take Ayuk 3 to 4 weeks to really round back into form, because that's essentially what training camp would have been in terms of practices and preseason, although he wouldn't have really played much in the preseason. So now the question becomes, this is week 2 without McCaffrey. It's week 1 without Deebo Samuel. Let's at least just focus on Deebo. Who's going to step up in the absence of Deebo Samuel? Let's go through some of the options. So Brandon Ayuk so far in the season, 6 receptions for 71 yards on 10 targets. Juwan Jennings has gone 7 for 101 on 9 targets. Chris Conley, 1 catch for 4 yards on 1 target. And George Kittle, 11 for 116 and a touchdown on 13 targets. More on Kittle in a moment. So rounding out the receivers, so I mentioned 3, Ayuk, Jennings, and Conley. The other 2 on the roster, Ronnie Bell or Jacob Cowing. Who's going to see more snaps? I think currently Bell is edging out Cowing on snaps, and neither one really has all that many. And Cowing really just seeing time on special teams. But will we see either one of these young players get more playing time? And it's so difficult for an offense like San Francisco that very rarely goes 4 pure wide receivers, because they'll flex Kittle out, sometimes even Juszczyk, McCaffrey, who's not in. So when you're receiver 5 or 6 on the depth chart, one, if you're receiver 6 and all 6 are healthy, you're not going to be active. And it's almost impossible for receiver 5 to get on the field. And receiver 4, it's an uphill battle. But now that you're down a starting receiver and 2 dynamic playmakers, what does Kyle Shanahan have in store for the Rams? And we're going to get into, I don't know what the game plan is, of course, but his thoughts on the offensive philosophy of missing players in a few minutes. Now, Niners injuries somewhat new for San Francisco. George Kittle has a hamstring injury or tightness. He is questionable, and cornerback Charvarius Ward, he has a hamstring and a knee issue. He is questionable as well. On the plus side, Talanoa Hufanga might be back at safety. Now, this is a game where even just looking at numerically how many players they're missing. Missing a McCaffrey, a Deebo, and let's just say Kittle doesn't play. The Niners should have enough on offense and even defense. When you look at, say, Charvarius Ward can't go, it would be Ward and Yadam probably getting the starts and Renardo Green moving to the nickel in 3 wide packages. But the Niners should have enough on offense and defense to defeat a completely undermanned team. And let's go through this. Now, these are players for the Rams that are either on IR or the physically unable to perform list. So offensive tackles, Connor McDermott, Joe Noteboom, guard Steve Avila, guard Jonah Jackson, tight end Tyler Higbee, he's the only one on the PUP list, and starting receivers Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Now, they did get back tackle Alaric Jackson from suspension. He will probably be starting at one of the tackle spots since they are so decimated on the offensive line. But it doesn't stop there. Defensively, they are down cornerbacks Darion Kendrick and Darius Williams and starting safety John Johnson. They do have, if you guys aren't intimately familiar with the Rams defense, they did sign Tre'Davious White, formerly of the Buffalo Bills, and he is healthy. But one more minus, they did trade in before the season started linebacker Ernest Jones, their best pass rusher, to the Tennessee Titans because he wanted a new contract. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 players that are either starters or significant contributors for a team that almost knocked off the Lions in the divisional round last year, and many people were picking to be a wild card team and possibly push the Niners for the division in the NFC West. And they are staring down the barrel at an 0-3 hole. And if they go 0-3, who could really blame them with all of the injuries that they're suffering? No one's crying for them, especially not anyone that's part of the 49er organization or part of the fan base, given historically how much the Niners have had to churn through players given injuries throughout the years. But it's a team that in Los Angeles, they played hard, week 1 against the Lions. That's, they were closer to full strength than they are now and got the doors blown off at Arizona. Kyler Murray with a perfect passer rating, did whatever he wanted through the air, on the ground. James Conner had over 100 yards, and the Rams were just all sorts of inept offensively and lost defensively. But again, given the subtractions, it's hard to really blame them. I mean, it was 41-10? I mean, maybe you keep it a little bit closer, but it was a 24-3 game at the half, and effectively the running game was gone, and they had to turn to the pass. The injury impact, and Sean McVay, before, Cooper Kupp is probably going to be out for a couple of weeks. Puka Nacua is on IR, and I mentioned all the other injuries. He is really going to have to dig deep in his Wizards hat in terms of putting something together to move the ball on offense. And of course, getting stops on defense when you're down basically 4 starters from last year. The defensive line is intact, and they can get after it, and they have a good interior defensive tackle presence that'll probably give the Niners O-line and specifically Jake Brendel some issues. But you'll see in terms of these overarching stat comparisons where the Rams are really struggling. Now, rushing offense, the Niners are averaging 141 yards a game, the Rams 68. And again, this is a me impact because I drafted Kyren Williams for one of my fantasy teams, just like I drafted Christian McCaffrey with the number 1 pick on my other fantasy team. Points scored offensively. So one is, and I'm sorry to Niner fans for McCaffrey, and then one will be you're welcome Niner fans for when they face Kyren Williams on Sunday. Now, points scored, Niners through 2 games averaging 24.5 points. 15 for the Rams through their 2 games, 20 against the Lions and 10 against Arizona. The rush defense, San Francisco hovering around that area where they were for the last third of last year. 107 yards per game over 2 games. The Rams giving up 197 yards a game on the ground. And points allowed, 21 for the Niners and 33.5 for the Rams. The Rams, again, it's only through 2 games, but given the injuries, do we see it really getting much better? The Rams have statistically the worst defense in the league, allowing 426 yards per game. The Niners are 90 yards better. Thereabouts at 334.5, which is middle of the pack. So the first 2 games, obviously up and down for defensive coordinator Nick Sorensen. Looked good against the Jets. Did not look so good against the Vikings, though there was a lot of blame to go around there. But this needs to be a get-right game for San Francisco. This needs to be a step on their throat from the jump and not let up and really rout a Rams team that is severely undermanned. Now, on the flip side, we have folks talking about how much more does Brock Purdy need to do? Does he need to step up? Because he's missing McCaffrey and Deebo. And that's not even to mention, we have no idea what Ricky Pearsall is going to be, but hopefully we'll see him, maybe 3 games from now at Seattle. And here's a quote from Kevin Harlan, who does, obviously TV and some radio as well, play-by-play. Quote, Purdy is going to have to be lights out. QBs who make $40 to $50 million a year, that's the way they've got to play when they don't have every part at their disposal. So, I just want to dive into that a little bit. I don't think Brock needs to play lights out to beat the Rams, right? If the Niners defense plays lights out and the offense is middling, which God, we all hope that's not the case, because who knows what the media and social media and 49er fandom conversation is going to devolve into. But he doesn't need to play lights out to beat the Rams or the Cardinals next, or visit the Patriots and the Cardinals. Even though the Patriots played some good defense and the Cardinals looked good against the Rams. Diving into what Kevin Harlan said a little bit more, though, QBs who make $40 to $50 million, and I guess that's on like the cheap side nowadays because we're going over 50, maybe over 60, is that they have to play lights out when they don't have everything at their disposal. And I want to say this now, just being on record and I'm recording this on September 19th. When Brock gets paid, and there's been other people saying, well, if Brock doesn't play well with players out, he shouldn't get the bag. Or I need to see, and these are some, I'm using air quotes here, reputable 49er fans on social media. So it'll fall under the Twitter twat category of, I need to see more from Brock Purdy before giving him a large contract. Now, it doesn't matter what you think. You're not the GM of the organization or Jed York or Kyle Shanahan. So your opinion, just like mine, is nonsense. But yours is more nonsensical because short of Brock Purdy, knock on wood, doesn't happen, like suffering a catastrophic career-ending injury, he is going to get paid the bag. He has proven in a year and a half-ish that he can get to the team, the NFC Championship game, that he can get the team to the Super Bowl, that he can be nominated for NFL MVP and play at a very high level statistically when you just look at the numbers on paper, but then passing the eye test when you're watching games and breaking down film after the fact. There is no more wait and need to see with Brock Purdy. Folks that are going to hang on. Well, let's see what he can do without some of his players. Oh, all right, that's fine. Let's also see how the defense plays. Can they get off the field on third downs? Can they actually bottle up the run? Can they make Stafford and a whole bunch of backup wide receivers one-dimensional? Can they play complementary football? Can they not turn the ball over? Can they not have a pump block? Can they not give up a 97-yard touchdown by having one safety corner cover the opposing team's best receiver and one safety over the top? Now, if you want to do that, this is the week to do it. Because the best receiver on the Rams is going to be Demarcus Robinson, but still schematically, you don't ever want to do that. And just to put a bow on the whole, when Brock starts making $40 to $50 million thing, I might have said this last podcast. It was only 3 days ago, and my brain is mush at this point. Brock was 31-12 last year, touchdowns, interceptions. So he gets paid $50, $55 plus million. What are we honestly expecting? What are those Debbie Downers or people that have unrealistic expectations expecting? Him to go 45-9 because he's making this much money? Same with Ayuk. Oh, you're getting paid $30 million now. Now you have to show. What does he have to show? Just repeat last year. Go 75 or 80 receptions for 1,300 plus yards. And, if you can get to double-digit touchdowns, that's awesome. But you're not going I'm not expecting 1,800 yards out of Ayuk or 100 catches just because he got paid. Plus, it's not the volume of catches that he's going to have with so many other options on this offense. So if Brock plays like he did last year, this year and in the future, say hovers between 28 and 35 touchdowns, 10 to 13, 14 interceptions, are we going to say he's not worth the money? This is not a proportional thing. Well, he's making 40, 45 times as much now, so you need 40 times. That would be ridiculous, right? But it's not even double the production. It's not even 1.5 times the production. It's consistency. And if in this offense with running the ball, Brock is a 30-ish plus touchdown passer, and he's going to be top 5 in QBR and QB rating, completion percentage, QBR, whatever. What more can you ask? I don't think there's a QB really that's one across the board, and Brock might have been the closest in the past 5 years to that in the season that he put up last year. Where he is now, surprisingly, number 1 in passing yards with 550. He's 5th in the league in yards per attempt, 3rd in average completion air yards of 8.4. So anybody still thinking about dink and dunk, you were wrong 2 years ago, you were wrong last year, and you're wrong this year, and you're doubly wrong this year because there's no Christian McCaffrey. There is no threat of anyone being a check down Charlie. And without Deebo, I can only imagine the horizontal passing game is going to go away too. So his average air yards are going to be top 5, top 7-ish this year. Cope, everybody. Brock actually pushes the ball downfield. He's 8th in completion percentage at 72.3. Was at 73% last week in a losing effort at Minnesota. 9th in QB rating, 96.3, and 8th in QBR. So top 10 across the board. There are organizations out there that do QB power rankings that consistently have Brock out of the top 10. Said it months ago, I'm just going to maintain it depending on where you want to plant your flag and the argument you want to make. Brock is anywhere from the 8th best quarterback to 12th best quarterback in the NFL. And people will hold that against him. Draft position, players he has. He's a 49er quarterback. He should be top 5. Look at who they've had. They've had Montana and Young, and Garcia gave him good years. It's okay. Top 10 quarterback, even if you're at the bottom third of the top 10, still pretty damn good, right? And here's an advanced stat because, there's metrics for everything. Brock leads the NFL in aggressive throw rate, and the percentage or the rate is 24.6%. What this means is, or they're calculating passing attempts or passing completion percentages on attempts thrown into coverage where a defender is within 1 yard or less of the wide receiver. Let's not take that to mean that the Niners are not getting separation, that the receivers are not getting separation consistently. I think that is a fallacy. But Brock is not shying away from tight window throws. That's what that's saying. And he made a tight window bad throw last week, forcing one into Juszczyk that was tipped twice and intercepted. But ultimately, I would say that that stat proves that Brock is not playing cautiously. He's on the whole system quarterback thing. He's playing within Shanahan's system. He's taking chances. And whether that stat was skewed based on going up against a very good defense with the Jets and a very aggressive, or at least a very good secondary, the run defense was lacking at least week 1, and a very aggressive defense in Minnesota, and Brian Flores had Brock confused, and that's okay. Brock doesn't have it all figured out yet, and someone like Tom Brady probably didn't have it all figured out until maybe his 15th year in the league. Brock's allowed to make mistakes, but he's not shying away from trying to get his playmakers the ball. Were there openings last week when he took 6 sacks against Minnesota that he probably could have, uncorked one to an Ayuk or Deebo or Kittle? Yes. But we have the benefit of watching plays or watching the film half speed, quarter speed, play, rewind, zoom in, versus real time Brock possibly, or more likely, probably not trusting what he sees because Brian Flores had him fooled at times. Still to the point of completing 73% of his passes, but were there throws that were still out there for Brock? Yes. Did he take a couple sacks? Maybe 2 of the sacks of his 6 were because he could have gotten rid of the ball earlier, or he was trying to buy time and he just kind of took a dive and took a sack himself? Yeah. They weren't all 6 on the offensive line. There was shared responsibility, like I mentioned last podcast. But Brock is taking the plays that are there to be taken and still pushing, based on this stat, the ball downfield even when players are not significantly open. Offensively, without Deebo McCaffrey, obviously I mentioned before, you still have Ayuk, you still have Jennings, you still have Conley, you have Juice, you might have Kittle. Let's see what's going on with the hamstring there. You have Jordan Mason, who's second in the NFL in rushing yards. He's averaging 5.1 yards per carry. So he still has, let's just make the assumption now that Kittle plays. You still, if nothing else, and Kittle's 90%, let's say, you still have Ayuk, Kittle, and Mason. That'll be his triplet in terms of offensive weapons, which is pretty darn good, before you sprinkle in Jennings and Conley, who's probably going to at least get the nod to start opposite Ayuk. And obviously relying on Juszczyk maybe a little bit more this week, next, until McCaffrey comes back. And who knows, that might not be until after the bye week. In terms of, designed routes and checkdowns. And we'll see how much Mason gets involved. 1 reception against the Jets. I don't think any, or I could be mistaken, against the Vikings. But to put a bow on this whole, does Brock need to step up? Can he step up without his full complement of weapons? He didn't last year for 3 games. Cleveland, Minnesota, and Cincy, missing Deebo and Trent Williams. That was only 1 offensive playmaker. You could call Trent Williams an offensive playmaker, but he's not, catching the ball. Even if Brock does step up, and I don't know what that looks like, guys. Are we going to go and say he's got to have a crazy fantasy football season or game rather, 350 yards, 3 touchdowns, just blow the doors off? And again, apologies, because I do have Brock Purdy drafted in one of the fantasy leagues, so I could be putting the mush on a lot of these players. But even then, even if he has a stellar game, there's going to be a but The Niners were only missing CMC and Deebo. The Rams were missing 11 players. There will always be people that will push the goalposts back for someone like Brock versus pushing them forward for someone like Caleb Williams, who's looked like absolute dog shit through 2 weeks. And he was supposed to come into the league guns blazing for the Bears, mentioned to his punter, you're not going to be punting a lot this year. And I saw it coming, at least with Caleb. Rookie preseason is not the same as regular season. They're pushing the goalposts closer for someone like Anthony Richardson, right? Like, oh, he's not a finished product. He's very athletic. Brock, there's always going to be a yeah, but. And Brock doesn't need to get knocked over with 36 bouquets of flowers, but he should get, his roses at some point for doing what he's been doing and how he's led this team the past year and a half. There's going to be a yeah, but if it's not this week, it'll be next week against Arizona, not a very good team, and the following week against the Patriots, 2 games in San Francisco that the Niners should handle business. Now, there was a question by one of the media members to Kyle about how the offense is going to evolve without Deebo and McCaffrey. Let me read this. Question, quote, do you have a lot fewer plays at your disposal without Deebo and McCaffrey, or do you just have the same amount of plays with running them with different guys? And here was Kyle's answer. Quote, yeah, I'd say we still have the same amount of plays, just somewhat different styles of play, different people in different spots. You eliminate some special things that you would do only for those guys, but the number doesn't change. Just there's things those guys do very well, nothing other guys can't do, but there's kind of different percentages on how much you call them and things like that. I buy that. Let's give it like 70%. Yes, there are some special things that you would only do for those guys. Get it. McCaffrey, splitting him out wide, giving him certain routes. No one else on the team at running back can do that. Deebo, more of the short horizontal game, wide receiver screens, tuttle screens, jet sweeps, lining up in the backfield. At least the last one, the lining him up in the backfield. I don't think any other receiver should be doing that. But, and I'm looking at you, Jacob Cowing, even though it's not your choice, it's Kyle Shanahan's choice. They can give Cowing some of those Deebo-esque plays horizontally, dynamic, quick, small, agile, that he's not going to, and Kyle even said, they're not going to do things as well. They're not, quote, it's nothing that other guys can't do, but there's a different percentage of how much you call them. The percentage is 0. The Deebo Samuel short game, quick throws, make something happen is 0 when Deebo's not in. That's why I'm saying I'm buying what he's saying 70 to 75%. Coaches, GMs, everybody lies. Bill Belichick, never gave anything away. But for the reporters in that room that not travel with the Niners, but travel to games, cover in the locker rooms, etc., breaking down film, it's a truism to a point, but not one that I'm going to take wholeheartedly, because watching the games, we know that's not the case. So we will see how much the offense stays true to what they've always been versus evolving somewhat, given missing 2 of their most dynamic playmakers. But even still, guys, came across this, even still, where they are right now through 2 games, the Niners are second in the NFL in big plays, and that's defined by rushes of 10 yards or more or receptions of 20 yards or more. They have 18 in total. They have 9 rushes of 10 yards or more and 9 receptions of 20 yards or more. They're getting chunk plays. They are getting chunk plays. Granted, they had Deebo fully last game, and it just was missing McCaffrey for the first two. Is that 9 chunk plays per game going to continue against the Rams? I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to get into the prediction in a second. But I think the demise of San Francisco, or how people are looking at them, I think is a little overblown. And even as fans looking back on that Viking game, right? You had a block punt that gave the Vikings 3 points. Defense, give them credit. They stood tall. You had an interception deep in San Francisco's end from Purdy that the next play led to a touchdown. And obviously you had the bomb to Jefferson. So you can't just say, well, that's 17 points right there. It is, and that was the majority of the 24 that they got. But San Francisco's special teams, defense, and offense, each one of those scores was to blame for either a quick score or putting the defense on the field in a short field. And that still could be, if you want to say could be canceled out, because I said this last week or last podcast, the Vikings still had 2 more drives that were stopped by Fred Warner turnovers, the fumble at the inside the 1 yard line and the interception inside the 20. And those are turnovers. That's luck. That's things you can't count on every week. What the Niners need to start counting on is better third down defense. So far this year, the Niners are allowing conversions, 8 of 11 conversions on third down of 7 or more yards. That's 73%, whereas the average of the NFL, if you take the Niners out, the average of the other 31 teams, 22%. So think about that. Even though I said 8 of 11, essentially the Niners are giving up third downs of 7 or more yards 7 out of every 10 times. The rest of the NFL, 2 out of every 10. That's unacceptable. And if it's because you're not getting home with the front 4, or you're playing too soft defensively, or you had a lapse in coverage, or you missed a tackle, whatever it may be, Fred Warner came out and said, we have to play smarter. And I think my response on Monday was, well, you have too many veterans and too many ultra-talented players to really play dumb as much as they are. And it's not like they're playing dumb every possession. Let's not get ridiculous with it. But if the front 4 is not getting home, and if they're not getting home against this Rams line, then there's a major discussion to be had on Monday, even if they win the game. If the Niners front 4 doesn't dominate, and dominate may not equate to sacks, although you'd like to see, Stafford on the ground 6 times like Purdy was against the Vikings. I think Stafford got sacked 5 times by Arizona. Hurries, throwaways, interceptions, fumble, strip sack, whatever. The Niners need to force the issue. So let's get into the prediction. Let's start with the Rams. Really glad I'm not Sean McVay outside of the money and the Super Bowl victory. But what does he do this week and in the coming weeks? With your offensive line so battered, do you lean into the run? I mean, he would know if the players that he has in obviously are better run blockers than pass blockers, but do you lean into that with Kyren Williams, who, because I drafted him in fantasy, has not had a good start to the season. 18 for 50 and 1 touchdown against the Lions, 12 for 25 and 1 touchdown against the Cardinals. Although the Cardinal game, that game got out of hand quickly, 24-3 at the half. They were down, so the Rams were in catch-up mode. Or does McVay just not shy away from what his offense is and who he is and lean more on Matthew Stafford and say, listen, you got to get the ball out. We can find holes in this 49er zone, screens, just move the chains and trust the best offensive player remaining on your team to become a field general and do what he's done for, 12 plus years and shoulder the offensive load. This is going to be a game where it's going to be very reminiscent for Matthew Stafford. He's going to feel like he's on the Lions and not today's Lions, 2015's Lions. Stafford's top 4 wide receivers now are DeMarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, Tutu Atwell, and rookie Jordan Whittington. DeMarcus Robinson being the most accomplished of the 4, but nobody that scares you. So what does it look like from the 49ers perspective? Can we look at it in a glass half full sort of way that missing Deebo and McCaffrey is actually a blessing in disguise for Kyle, because it forces him to get other people involved offensively and maybe call and get more comfortable scheming up a more traditional yet still creative offensive game plan. And I might be talking out of both sides of my mouth when I said, well, you could still bring in Jacob Cowing for what Deebo Samuel does, the horizontal passing game, and I stand by that. But Kyle's not going to change his stripes. So does this offense turn more into a power running team with play action off of that and really become much more West Coast-ish, quick passes, shorter passes, get Conley open in space, same with Jennings, but not really pushing it maybe as much downfield to Ayuk. I don't know what this is going to look like, but Kyle better get comfortable with it soon because it's not going to change in week 4. I'm sure Deebo's going to be out. Maybe you get him back week 5. But it can't and shouldn't feel like the same offense that he's been running, and maybe he leans into, I said it last podcast, Jordan Mason, feed it through Kittle if he is healthy, or force the issue to Ayuk. Really, like baptism by fire. Okay, bro, you're back. They're missing 2 of their top 3 corners. You're probably going to draw Tre'Davious White for most of the game. Let's see what you can do. Not because he got paid, just because he's one of their best offensive players, or maybe their best offensive player remaining. Will the Niners come after Stafford? I didn't watch the Cardinal games. So I don't know if Arizona was getting pressure with just 4, or they were coming after it. I think this is going to play into what's the defensive mentality. Is it going to be aggressive? Are they going to come after Stafford and make him trust these? I mean, they're somewhat experienced receivers. DeMarcus Robinson, 8th or 9th year. Tyler Johnson and Tutu Atwell, 3rd or 4th years. Jordan Whittington is a rookie, and no Tyler Higbee at tight end. Is Sorensen going to get very conservative and say, okay, I'm going to rush you with 4, and I'm going to see if your backup offensive playmakers can beat my zone, or when I mix in man, or when I disguise some sort of coverage and rotate things around on the back end? The happy medium is both. I mean, the happy medium is like a 50-50, right? That's literally the happy medium. But the defense hasn't been that downhill, aggressive, all gas, no brakes the first 2 games. Do we think it's going to happen? Or do we think the Niners think that, hey, when we line up man for man, our personnel on defense is better than your personnel on offense, and the only way you're going to beat us is through big plays, because we don't think you're going to do it in a sustained manner going down the field. Although, I'm just spitballing, I don't know if that's their mentality. Although the stats say otherwise with that whole 3rd down and 7 or more crap that I just talked about. And mentioning previously and standing by that good quarterbacks will always pick apart even a very good zone. Now it's a matter of, is Stafford going to have time to do it? Are the receivers going to have the ability to get open? Is there going to be a comfort level and chemistry with it? But this is Stafford. They're not going up against, Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson or Malik Willis. This is one of the top quarterbacks in the NFC, if not the top quarterback in the NFC. And what will this game prove if the Niners win? Outside of like a Cardinals win, like 41-10, it's going to prove nothing. The Rams are beaten up to high heaven. I don't care that the Niners are without Deebo and McCaffrey, and let's throw Dre Greenlaw in, and maybe Kittle, and maybe Hufanga doesn't play. The players that are remaining on the field for each team, the Niners have the better roster. They had the better roster last week against Minnesota. It didn't matter. Kudos to Brian Flores and that defense. Unless they totally stomp on the Rams, this is going to be, the reaction is going to be, well, they should have beaten them. And the last I checked, the Niners were a 7.5-point favorite. Honestly, I don't think they cover. I have the Niners winning this game 27-20. I think I have in my mind's eye, being able to see the Niners struggling in the first quarter and not being able to get the ground game going, and Kyren Williams and a Rams rushing offense, which is dead last in the NFL, running it down the Niners' throat inexplicably. Although the Niners' run defense is middle of the pack, it's not like we're talking, a top 5 unit. Knowing they don't have their top 2 receivers and top tight end, I am wary of I don't know if the Niners are going to take the Rams lightly. I know there's the whole, Levi South, and it's predicted to be 63% Niner fans. And the Rams are usually a get-right game for San Francisco the past, 4 years. And it should be as well. But I think this game is going to be uncomfortable for us fans far longer than it should be. But I do think the Niners win 27-20. That concludes the Niners section of the podcast. Please stick around. Plus section, we're talking Tua's health and future, and I'm reviewing the movie Civil War. Stay right here.
It's plus time.
All right. The whole Tua Tagovailoa situation is unfortunate, and I think uncomfortable and messy for the player and the organization. As you know, he suffered his 3rd concussion against the Bills this past Thursday, probably actually his 4th, because he did have one which was diagnosed as a back injury instead when he was all sorts of wobbly, couldn't walk, needed one of his offensive linemen to help him off the field. Tua is on IR, so he's unavailable for at least the next 4 games, which is obviously the right move. It's giving him time to heal, everything to calm in his brain and head, and he'll be reevaluated multiple times by multiple neurologists to compare what his baseline brain scan is in comparison to, whenever they scan him in the next couple weeks. And I'm sure you guys know the financial situation that he and the Dolphins are in. If he's medically forced into retirement, Tua can collect the remaining $124 million in guaranteed money that he has. If he's cleared but doesn't play, if he decides to retire and walk away, he'll get to keep his $43 million signing bonus and his $1.1 million salary for this year. One other note in terms of the money, Miami took out an insurance policy on Tua when they gave him the contract in July. It's a $49.3 million insurance policy for this year, and it goes down every subsequent season. I think next year will be $35 million should something happen to Tua and Tua retires or is forced to retire, whatever. So that only helps offset some of the actual cash out of their pocket that would go to Tua. It does not alleviate any salary cap space should Tua walk away from the game. Now, when it's all said and done, I do think doctors will clear him. even if it takes next season. Now, guys, remember, just like with the Brandon Ayuk situation, no one is holding a gun to anybody's head, Mike McDaniel, Tua, to his family, the owner of the Dolphins, to say, all right, you're 4 weeks on IR or up, you got to either play or retire. It obviously doesn't work that way. The medical advice that he gets from neurologists and any sort of emotional support and care and advice that he gets from friends and family members are going to play into it. But the decision is going to be obviously Tua's and Tua's alone. And why I mentioned even if it takes next season, doctors could say, okay, if you really want to give yourself the best chance to play long term, you have to put distance between yourself and this last concussion. And it might not be a month. It might not be 2 months. It might be 9 months, 11 months to next September for Tua to play again. Remember, like the signing bonus, his salary, like that's still all his. It's any future money or future guarantees that are what's technically on the table. But that's, so I don't want to say unimportant because it's not my money. It's his money and his future. Let's not say that he can't live well off of, $44.1 million. Of course he could if he decides to hang it up. Now, if he does, decide to retire, the Dolphins can do what the Colts did with Andrew Luck and, if you want to call it, gift him some of his future salary or guarantees when Luck retired, however many years ago it's been at this point, 4 or 5, whatever it may be. I think he's going to be cleared, and I think he's going to want to play. And Mike McDaniel's saying all the right things. Everybody that's on TV, I don't know, I don't follow any Miami Dolphin, Twitter fans, but everybody's saying, if that was my son, or I would tell him to retire. Everyone's saying the right thing. What I'm going to say is not the wrong thing. Is I'm just going to say, Tua, do what's best for you, man. Like, he's 26 years old. Even with the concussions, there's still a part of him that probably thinks he's invincible, to the point of like, yeah, I've had 3 concussions, maybe 4, but I'm not going to get CTE. That's just something that happens to other people. 26 was many moons ago for me, and I don't know how old you are out there listening, but even when you were a teenager, right, you never thought about, being super careful riding your bike that you can get hit by a car or a car accident or anything crazy happen. That's just being young. And CTE is generally something that happens, say, in someone's maybe late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s. And no, he's not thinking that far ahead. And Mike McDaniel, he's been really great and supportive in terms of saying all the right things, but let's not be cynical. He wants Tua to come back. And so does the owner of the Dolphins. The future of that organization is tied to Tua to get the most out of that offense and what the money they gave to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and having Devin Achane there and Raheem Mostert. Tua's the trigger man. He makes it work. And he had a really good season. He was healthy for all 17 games, 18 games, even though they crapped out, at Kansas City. No one's talking about him returning and wearing the Guardian cap. I think only 4 players wore it week 1. I'm not sure, based on what I read, how many wore it week 2. And it apparently reduces 10% of the impact or the hit. Why he wasn't wearing that to begin with, I don't know. I mean, you're obviously, there is data saying that once you have a concussion or multiple concussions, you are more prone to it than someone who's never had a concussion before. That's an option, right? And I don't think it's been discussed too much, but he may think of it and say, okay, listen, I'm just not ready to give it up yet, especially if this is the doctors clear him. And just to be clear, he cannot be forced into retirement. whatever the language is in terms of like the NFLPA, collective bargaining, medical specialists cannot force him into retirement. It would have to be the Dolphins cutting him, in which case someone else is going to pick him up. That would be the only card that the Dolphins can actually forcefully play. But Tua may come back and say, listen, I'm not ready to hang it up. I want to wear the guardian cap for the rest of this year or all of next year or the rest of his career, and maybe have the mentality of, and if I get one more, then I'm done. And it's a gamble. You don't know how severe that next one could be if it ever comes to pass, but the guardian cap is there for a reason. It adds a bit more protection, so why wouldn't he use it? Or at least try to use it, right? Now, the Dolphins, the whole health fool's gold that they experienced with Tua last year, 18 healthy games, did not mean that you still go into the season with Skylar Thompson as your backup quarterback. He's not a backup. He's a QB3 at best. The Dolphins, and on top of that, the Dolphins started the season with only 2 quarterbacks on their roster, Thompson and Tua. Now, they recently signed Tyler Huntley, who was with the Ravens for a bunch of years, and he'll probably get acclimated and become the quarterback in the next maybe week or two, but it should probably be Skylar Thompson at Seattle. But it's still amazing to me how some teams, just teams in general, now obviously when you lose your QB1, your season is on the verge of circling the drain. It's very rare. It doesn't happen. It was super rare that the Niners could lose 2 quarterbacks and still get to the NFC Championship game 2 years ago with Brock Purdy. But you have teams that are taking the backup quarterback situation seriously. The Rams brought in Garoppolo. I know he's a very polarizing figure, but as your backup, familiar with that Shanahan-McVay system, good insurance for the Rams. He's actually back from suspension. He had a 2-game, was it a PED or something suspension, but he'll be backing up, at least I believe, Stafford against the Niners. Indianapolis went out and got Joe Flacco, who saved the Browns season essentially last year, and Deshaun Watson has been kind of crap since. Carolina, Andy Dalton taking over for Bryce Young, who was benched. And the Jets, after last year's absolute dumpster fire, went out and how Tyrod Taylor is the backup to Aaron Rodgers. And hopefully none of these backups play. I'm sure they want to, right? They want to maybe revitalize their career, or if they have playing time incentives in their contracts, who knows? But then you have teams like the Dolphins, Skylar Thompson is your number 2. Arizona, Clayton Tune, if Kyler Murray goes down. Detroit, Hendon Hooker, second-year player from Tennessee. Green Bay trades for Malik Willis. And yes, the Packers did beat the Colts last week. Josh Jacobs went nuts and they ran for 200 yards. I don't understand how they ran for 200 yards because the Colts knew that was all that offense can do. Buccaneers with Kyle Trask behind Baker Mayfield. This is not taking your quarterback position seriously. I don't care how much you have dedicated or devoted monetarily to your QB1. A backup quarterback like Sam Darnold went to Minnesota in free agency before they drafted J.J. McCarthy. So I think he got $10 million. J.J. McCarthy gets hurt. Sam Darnold's there, and at least through 2 weeks, it was a sound decision to bring in a veteran who had a lot of, we'll just call it untapped potential. But Clayton Tune, Hendon Hooker, Malik Willis, Kyle Trask, all young players that each team, that were taken in the draft, and Willis was traded to the Packers. So they're cheap labor. But you get what you pay for, guys, right? In a lot of aspects in life, and especially with backup quarterbacks. Tyrod, Dalton, Flacco, Jimmy, and Darnold are making more. One of them is probably making more than Tune, Hooker, Willis, and Trask combined. And it's going to show on the field. Now let's just pivot from the NFL and get into movies. So last night, I wound up watching the movie Civil War on HBO. It's actually a movie I had a lot of interest in going to the theater for, but didn't because ultimately me being lazy and a cheap bastard probably won out. But it was written and directed by Alex Garland, who also wrote and directed a film called Ex Machina from 2014, I believe, which came out a year before Star Wars The Force Awakens and starred two actors who were also in The Force Awakens, Domhnall Gleeson and Oscar Isaac. And if you haven't seen that movie, Ex Machina, I think it was a really good movie made on a super low budget. Also starred Alicia Vikander, who was Lara Croft in the most recent Tomb Raider movie, which at this point was probably not very recent. But Oscar Isaac is kind of like an eccentric, rich, tech person who has developed AI in a quasi-human body played by Alicia Vikander, and Domhnall Gleeson comes out for the weekend to the house to interact with, we'll call it her. And she kind of plays him and seduces him and ultimately winds up escaping. And but the effects, the mood, the story, the acting, really, really good film. So I'm like, okay, that was Ex Machina was something different. Now this is Civil War is not sci-fi. It's a completely different type of film, but I at least like that from Alex Garland. So it stars Kirsten Dunst, and the story is she's a photojournalist, and her and two other journalists or photojournalists and a teenage wannabe photojournalist are traveling from New York City to get to Washington, D.C. while the country is in the midst of a civil war. 19 states have seceded from the U.S. This coalition is called the Western Forces, and they are led by essentially the states of Texas and California. On their army fatigues or uniforms, there's a new flag with only 2 stars. And essentially, the U.S. government has disavowed its allegiance to the Constitution and is now held under the dictatorship of its president, who has disbanded the FBI, has used military force against U.S. citizens, and he's refused to give up his executive power. He's on his 3rd term by disavowing the whole system of checks and balances that the U.S. legal system and political system is based upon. All right, sounds good, sounds interesting. What I just read to you the last minute, I had to find online. I did not know watching the movie that 19 states seceded. I knew it was Texas and California because they verbalized that, and that there was also Florida was part of this coalition, and they were kind of making a move on D.C. from the west, Washington, D.C. from the west and the south. So I knew of 3 states, didn't know about the other 16. Didn't know about this disavowing its allegiance to the Constitution, disavowing checks and balances. While I was entertained, and I was really more, watching any movie, it's kind of, you're invested in the story, and it's about what's going to happen next. What's the character arcs? What's going to happen to your antagonist, protagonist, whatever it may be. You actually want to get to the end, and you're trying to piece together with a lot of movies how this is going to unfold. Civil War was no different for me. I think I went into it not realizing that the states that seceded from the U.S. did so because the president was essentially became a fascist. I would have thought the other way around, that, uppity folks or states wanted to do their own thing, and the government was normal, but states just decided they wanted to, I'm not a screenwriter, but just like, we're just going to do our own thing, and we're going to secede, and we're going to go to war with you. I didn't think it would have happened the other way around. But the issues I have with this now, first off, for folks, out there, Kirsten Dunst, I'm from New Jersey. I didn't realize she was born in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. She's done a good amount since, obviously our first role, Interview with the Vampire, Bring It On, the 3 Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire, Melancholia. She's been in a lot, but I haven't seen N of One. I haven't seen her in a lot recently. And I always feel like when it comes to actors and actresses, like you have a snapshot of them in your mind from the movies you most closely associate with them with. And for me, it's probably the original Spider-Man trilogy. Kirsten Dunst is 42 years old now. Not super surprising. Everybody ages. She's still very pretty. They did a really nice job of making her tired and ragged and war-torn because she is chasing stories and photos, they don't necessarily say throughout the country, but that's kind of what they're implying in being a war photojournalist for overseas wars prior to when this movie starts. They use music in a weird way in a couple scenes that it almost felt like an 80s. It wasn't like a montage scene, but the music, using music in general and the specific music that they used felt awkward and out of place at times. Didn't necessarily take me out of the story. I just thought it was a curious, creative choice. Everything that I mentioned earlier about the story, a lot of it was not explained. This was an hour and 50-minute movie. It would have worked better as a series. I would have been much more interested in the road that led us to this movie. How secession would have actually been possible. How, states could pull away. What was the actual breaking point? Focusing in on the president who was turning fascist and would not leave office, stayed in for a third term. Although from a storytelling standpoint, how does that really work? President saying like, oh, I'm not leaving, and you don't basically have the army or officers just kind of forcibly remove him from the White House because our Constitution states that a president cannot be president for more than 2 terms. So it's just, what him sitting in his chair in the Oval Office just saying, I'm not leaving. I don't understand how that could happen. But it would have been interesting if they concoct a way that is realistic for that. What I mentioned before about the whole, states versus the government, and they kind of flipped it in terms of who the quote unquote bad guys are. I still don't understand how in a situation where you have the government still functioning and the president being the commander-in-chief of the army, and you only have specific states seceding, it was essentially the entire, again, from what I read, it wasn't in the movie, the entire East Coast, except for Florida, was still loyal to the president in the actual United States. Hawaii, Alaska but in addition to Texas, California, and Florida, you had 16 other states. And this wasn't a Democratic or Republican thing. I did want to say that. Obviously, California being highly Democratic, Texas being highly Republican, I think that was a specific choice made by the filmmaker to show, I am not speaking out against a specific political party. Maybe it'll be surprising for people watching this that you have the 2 largest states in the United States diametrically opposed on the political spectrum deciding to join up because they're not liking what the president is becoming. And then at the end, not to give this away, if you want to skip ahead like a minute or two. So the Western forces invade DC at the end of the movie. I won't go as far as to say what exactly happens. But they march on DC. Yeah, there's army, there's helicopters, helicarriers that are dropping, tanks in. And they're coming into DC and was interesting and startling to see. blowing up monuments, in downtown, DC. It wasn't just whatever the resistance was from the government, blowing up buildings, just seeming like they were taking or causing more collateral damage than they needed to versus just attempting to overthrow the government. But as it was happening, and if you watch the movie, you'll find out the president was still there. So in terms of I guess you don't have an FBI. Do you still have a CIA? Do you not realize what is happening what is happening with the opposition, where they are, where they're marching? Why would you stay in the White House? Wouldn't you be in some sort of underground bunker somewhere to protect the figurehead of, the world, a leader, but the figurehead of the country? No, he was in DC ripe for the plucking. I just found that as a very weird storytelling decision and just strategic decision from fighting a war, right? And it just still felt very odd that the commander-in-chief, the president who has the army at his disposal, cannot beat back a coalition of seceded states with the U.S. Army. Now, for this to unfold the way it did, there had to have been aspects of bases, Army personnel with bases in California, Texas, Florida, some of the other, seceded states that decided to fight against the government. What about any Army personnel overseas? I felt it odd that, that's why the whole amendment of the right to bear arms, from 1776 when it was drafted up is so that the people could fight back if the government gets, a little too big for its britches. I don't care how many militia you have and how many rednecks there are in our country with guns. If the government and the army wants to roll through you, they're going to roll through you. They're the ones with smart bombs. You're the ones with with rifles that you could buy at Walmart, right? In some states. If it's true the way they depicted photojournalists in the movie, then holy shit, big time respect to anyone who's a photojournalist during wartime, because I guess I had in my mind that maybe they are taking pictures after the fact, after a battle, after a bombing happens somewhere that, they're coming in and they're seeing the damage hours or days later. But if the way that it was depicted here, they're wearing crossing guards vests or Kevlar vests and helmets that say media on it. I'm sorry. Was it media or it might have been, I might be losing the word, but press, that they're with the press and they're, leaning or running out into open areas, trying to get, good shots of things. And the folks that they were with, it's almost like you're babysitting. If I was, in the army or you're a foot soldier and you have these press people kind of getting in your way. And there were times where they were pulling stuff back, especially like the young girl, the wannabe photojournalist. One, big ass brass balls, obviously to anyone who joins up in the army. It's so commendable and the courage and bravery to make that choice. And to the photojournalists that are putting their lives on the line for pictures and they're in the thick of the action. That was a little surprising to me. And then the last thing, and I should have done this in a little bit better of an order, I apologize. Kirsten Dunst's character is very tired and detached and cold and almost emotionless in a lot of ways. And she's like that for an hour and 30 minutes or an hour and 35 minutes of the movie. When they get to Washington, D.C., she breaks down. She can't move at times. She gets scared. She's screaming, crying. It never, and they went through some shit going from New York to get to DC. They, stop, not sure if they can trust people, seeing, people getting executed. the film does expose you to maybe what you would see or what could happen if this were ever to come to pass. But her inexplicable, just emotional break. And I mean, you're in Washington, D.C., and the government is going to fall. I'm sure it would get to a lot of people, but it just felt so abrupt, and there was no breadcrumbs, no hint of it, any step along the way that it was going to happen. I expected more from this movie. Still intrigued. It sounds so bad. Like, I'm intrigued by the possibility of the story. Not like I ever want, obviously, any of this to happen. And I don't think it could really unfold in the way that they showed, at least this aftermath. But I think this could have been much better served as a series, whether it was 1 season or 2 seasons, to get into how this all could have happened. Scary enough that there's, that something like this could happen in a developed world leader country, right? I mean, I guess there's always the possibility. But the snippets of time in the story that Alex Garland decided to tell was an interesting choice. Well done movie, had some pretty intense scenes and obviously a lot of violence. But I feel like so many of the blanks were not filled in, and that's really what I was most interested in. Not a waste of almost 2 hours. Watch it, draw your own conclusions. I don't know if I have any desire to watch it again or even watch it again in parts, but at least it checked that curiosity in terms of a film off my list for the time being. Now that concludes the 49ers Plus podcast, and the first one in maybe 3 or 4 episodes with Plus content. Like always, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to make us part of your listening routine. Jets and Patriots on now as I'm recording. I have no idea what's going on. College football, obviously, this weekend. Full slate of NFL games. Niners going to Levi's South against a beat-up Rams team, and I'm still hesitant about laying the 7.5, which is why I have the Niners winning 27-20, but get out of there with the win first and foremost. But how they win is going to be important for our sanity and our comfort levels moving forward, and of course, for any sort of narratives about the Niners moving on from LA to a 2-game homestand against the Patriots and the Cardinals. But between now and Sunday, whatever you are doing, stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe, and we will talk soon. Take care.